The date was May 25th, 1953. The time was 8:30 in the morning. The location was a desolate stretch of sand and sagebrush known as Frenchman Flat in the Nevada Proving Ground. Thousands of spectators were gathered in trenches. They included top generals, members of Congress, and hundreds of soldiers. They were all wearing dark goggles, staring intently at a patch of empty desert 7 miles away. A countdown echoed over the loudspeakers. 10, 9, 8. Then the world turned white. A flash of light, brighter than the sun, blinded the desert. The heat was so intense it could be felt on the skin miles away. A split second later, the ground rippled like water as the shockwave tore through the valley. A massive fireball rose into the sky, churning and twisting, turning purple and orange, forming the terrifying, unmistakable shape of a mushroom cloud. But this explosion didn't come from a bomb dropped by a B-29 bomber. It didn't come from a missile, it came from a shell fired by a gun. Sitting 10 miles away from the blast zone was a machine that looked like a nightmare from science fiction. It was 84 feet long. It weighed 83 tons. It looked like a giant steel insect suspended between two massive tractors. This was the M65, the atomic cannon. The soldiers who operated it called her Atomic Annie. It remains the only artillery piece in human history to ever fire a live nuclear weapon. This is the story of the gun designed to start and end World War III from the back of a truck. This is the story of the nuclear land train. To understand why this monster was built, you have to transport yourself back to the paranoia of the early 1950s. The Second World War was over, but peace had not arrived. The Cold War was freezing over. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a deadly standoff. In Korea, American forces were fighting wave after wave of soldiers. In Europe, the Soviet Union had thousands of tanks parked on the border, ready to flood through the Fulda Gap and conquer West Germany. The generals in Washington had a problem. They had nuclear weapons, yes, but they were strategic weapons. They were massive bombs that destroyed entire cities. They had to be carried by giant airplanes, which could be shot down by Soviet jet fighters. The army wanted a nuke of their own. They didn't want to destroy a city. They wanted to destroy an army. They wanted a tactical weapon they could drive right up to the front lines, point at an advancing Soviet tank division, and erase them from the map with a single trigger pull. But in 1949, missile technology was still in its infancy. Rockets were inaccurate and unreliable. If you wanted to hit a target 7 miles away with absolute certainty, you didn't use a rocket, you used a cannon. And so, the order was given to build a gun capable of firing a nuclear warhead. The engineering challenge was immense. The warhead, the W9, was 11 inches wide. To fire it, the gun had to be massive. The barrel alone was 40 feet long. The recoil force generated by firing a shell that heavy was so violent it would shatter a normal gun carriage instantly. The engineers calculated that the entire system would weigh over 80 tons. The question was, how do you move 80 tons of steel across rough terrain, through forests and over bridges in a war zone? You couldn't put it on tank tracks. It was too long and heavy. It would sink. The solution they found was brilliant, bizarre, and borrowed from the heavy railroad industry. They designed a system with 2 transporters. They commissioned Kenworth to build 2 custom heavy-duty tractors, the M249 and the M250. Each one was a beast, powered by a 375-horsepower engine. The design was unique. One tractor pulled the front of the gun, the other tractor pushed the rear. The cannon itself was suspended between them, hanging in the air like a bridge on wheels. It was, in every sense of the word, a land train. Driving this rig was an art form that required nerves of steel. The driver in the front tractor and the driver in the rear tractor were connected by a headset intercom system. They had to coordinate every single move. Shifting to second gear. Now. Braking. Now. If they got it wrong, or if one driver accelerated while the other braked, the massive 83-ton gun could jackknife, crushing the tractors and the crew. But the steering system was the true marvel. Both the front and rear tractors could steer independently. This meant that the atomic cannon could do things that seemed physically impossible for its size. It could turn sharp corners in narrow German villages, and, if it got stuck in mud, both drivers could turn their wheels in the same direction, allowing the entire machine to drive sideways like a giant crab. The top speed was 35 miles per hour. Seeing this metal leviathan roaring down a highway was a terrifying sight. It occupied both lanes. It shook the pavement. It looked like a train that had escaped the tracks. When Atomic Annie arrived at the firing position, the transformation began. It was a complex mechanical ballet. The tractors would stop. A massive hydraulic system would lower the central gun carriage onto the ground. Then the tractors would detach and drive away to a safe distance. Once the gun was sitting on its base, it looked like a praying mantis raising its head. The 40-foot barrel would be elevated into the sky. The loading mechanism was hydraulic. The shell, which contained a gun-type fission device similar to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, was carefully inserted into the breech. Behind it, bags of propellant were loaded. The recoil system was a masterpiece of physics. To stop the gun from flying backward when it fired, it used a double recoil system. The barrel would slide back, and the entire carriage would slide back on the ground, controlled by hydraulic brakes. It absorbed energy that would have ripped a battleship apart. Then came the day of the test, Operation Grable. It was the only time the United States would ever fire a nuclear shell from a cannon. The target area was marked in the desert, 7 miles away. The crew loaded the shell. They checked the coordinates. Then they ran to trenches dug nearby. When the lanyard was pulled, the gun didn't just bang, it roared. The M65 bucked violently. A ring of fire erupted from the muzzle. The 11-inch shell screamed into the sky. Unlike a normal artillery shell, the nuclear projectile was so large and the trajectory so high that spectators could actually track it with the naked eye. It was a black dot arcing against the blue Nevada sky. 19 seconds later, it arrived over the target. The fuse was set for an airburst. 500 feet above the ground, the W9 warhead detonated. The explosion had a yield of 15 kilotons. It obliterated everything in the target zone. Dummy tanks were tossed like toys. Jeeps were vaporized. A forest of pine trees planted for the test was snapped in half and set on fire instantly. The footage of the blast was shown in movie theaters across America. It was propaganda. It was meant to make the American public feel safe, to show them that their army had the biggest gun in the world. It was meant to terrify the Soviets. And it worked. The atomic cannon became a celebrity. It appeared in parades. It was the pride of the Eisenhower inauguration. The army quickly built 20 of them. They were shipped to Europe and South Korea. Imagine being a soldier in West Germany in 1955. You're driving down a country road, and suddenly you're blocked by a police escort. Helicopters are circling overhead, and then, emerging from the fog, comes this 80-foot-long monster flanked by armored vehicles. You knew that inside that convoy were nuclear shells. You knew that this machine had the power to end civilization. But in reality, even as the public cheered for Atomic Annie, the generals knew the truth. The weapon was flawed. The problem was range. The gun could fire about 20 miles. In the age of nuclear warfare, 20 miles is suicide. If a crew fired this weapon in a real war, they would be dangerously close to the atomic blast. They would be exposed to the fallout. Furthermore, the machine was a logistical nightmare. It was huge. It was slow to set up. In a fast-moving war, it was a sitting duck. A Soviet jet fighter could spot it from miles away. A single strafing run could disable the hydraulic lines, turning the 80-ton weapon into a useless pile of junk. Technology was moving too fast. By the mid-50s, rocketry had caught up. New tactical missiles like the Honest John and the Corporal were lighter, faster, and could travel hundreds of miles. They didn't need 2 tractors. They didn't need a paved road. The era of the giant gun was over before it really began. By 1963, just 10 years after the famous test shot, the Army retired the M65. The nuclear land trains were parked. Today, only a few survive. You can see the original Atomic Annie, the actual gun that fired the nuke, sitting at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. Another one sits at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. They sit silently on the grass, their olive drab paint fading in the sun. The massive Kenworth tractors are still hooked up, forever waiting for an order that will never come. They are dinosaurs of the atomic age. They are reminders of a brief, terrifying window in history when we tried to make nuclear war tactical. A time when engineers looked at the apocalypse and thought, we can build a truck for that. Looking at it now, it seems insane. The idea of driving a nuclear bomb around on a highway exposed to the elements seems reckless. But the engineering is undeniable. It was a machine built to do the impossible. It was a bridge between the era of steel and the era of the missile. And for one terrifying second in the Nevada desert in 1953, it did exactly what it was designed to do. It fired the sun from a barrel. Thanks for watching Iron Legacy. If you enjoyed this story of the ultimate land train, hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments. If you were the driver of the rear tractor sitting directly under the barrel of a loaded nuclear gun, how fast would you want to drive away after firing? See you in the next one.